In a time of prohibitions and tensions, when the traditional Mass seems increasingly sidelined, Pope Leo XIV made a gesture full of meaning, which has ignited hope among the most attentive faithful. An act that needs no explanation, but which shakes and makes us reflect on what it truly means to celebrate before God. Stay with us. On July 15th, 2025, the feast of San Bonaventure, in the chapel of the Carabinieri Barracks in Castell Gandalfo, Pope Leo, for the first time as Supreme Pontiff, publicly celebrated Holy Mass Ad Orientem, facing the altar and not the people. If you appreciate our outreach service and believe in the values of truth and transparency, please purchase a super thank you. Each piece of content requires commitment, study, and dedication, and our work is entirely self-funded. Your support helps us continue this mission. Thank you so much. A decision that doesn't surprise those familiar with his sensitivity, but which is surprising for the force with which it was offered to the world, without explanation or mediation. At a time when the liturgy has once again become a battleground, and at the same time a testing ground for fidelity to tradition, the Pope has chosen to take the plunge, making the gesture that so many were waiting for, turning with the people toward God, rather than with God toward the people. It was not a spectacle or a symbolic concession. It was an act of governance, of resistance against the idea that tradition should remain confined to marginal groups and barely tolerated. Pope Leo XIV, without saying a word, reminded the entire Church that the sense of the sacred of the direction toward God is not a nostalgia to be repressed, but a truth to be rediscovered. This is not the first time that Pope Leo XIV has hinted at the importance of recovering the sense of mystery in the liturgy. Already on the occasion of the Jubilee of the Eastern Churches, speaking to the representatives of those rites, he had used precise and unequivocal words to express admiration for their ancient liturgies, so different from the cold functionality that is often felt in the West. On that occasion, he underlined how in Eastern celebrations, a sense of mystery remains alive that involves the human person in his entirety, that sings the beauty of salvation and evokes wonder at how the majesty of God embraces our fragility. He went so far as to say that it is vitally important to preserve these traditions without diluting them, so that they are not corrupted by the mentality of consumerism and utilitarianism. Phrases that at the time sounded like a generic praise of liturgical diversity, but which today, in light of the Mass Ad Orientem, take on a whole new meaning. For the Pope, Eastern liturgies preserve something that Latin Catholicism risks losing: the ability to bring man to God without transforming the altar into a stage and the Mass into a spectacle. The gesture comes at a time of heightened liturgical tension. In recent years, the traditional Latin Mass has been subject to increasingly severe restrictions, with bishops leveraging the traditionis custos, imposing restrictions even where attendance was lively and orderly. Celebrations at Orientem, although never formally prohibited and possible both in the traditional form and in the Missal of Paul VI, have often been discouraged or prohibited at the local level, invoking a certain unity understood as forced uniformity. Official documents continue to speak of preserving tradition and promoting communion, but in practice, many priests and faithful have found themselves sidelined, as if their love for the Latin Mass were an oddity barely to be tolerated. Some bishops have even issued circulars prohibiting celebrations facing the altar, even in the ordinary form of the Roman Rite, despite the rubrics of the Missal of Paul VI clearly providing for this as a legitimate option. But what does it really mean to celebrate Ad Orientem? It means clearly demonstrating that the Mass is addressed to God, not to the congregation. It's not simply a way of being, but an act that directs everyone's attention and hearts in the same direction. The priest places himself on the same side as the faithful, leads the prayer without placing himself at the center, and together with the community looks toward the mystery that is accomplished on the altar. Celebrating Ad Orientem helps to make clear that the liturgy is not a dialogue between the celebrant and those attending, but a common, choral action that tends upward. This choice reduces the temptation to transform the Mass into a performance and restores the altar to its authentic meaning as a place of encounter between man and God, not a simple table or a stage. Pope Leo XIV's gesture comes in a contradictory context, made up of both positive signals and punitive measures. While in Castell Gandalfo, the celebration was Ad Orientem, in the United States and other parts of the world, restrictions continue to be applied that severely affect communities tied to the traditional liturgy. Parishes that once had thriving communities around the Latin Mass have been dismembered, hours reduced to a minimum, and the faithful forced to seek distant and often makeshift locations to continue attending the Mass they feel is their own. Cardinal Gerhard Ludwig Müller referred to this situation in an interview with the Associated Press, defining the fight against the Latin Mass as senseless. According to Müller, the energy spent fighting the faithful tied to tradition not only fails to bring unity, but creates unnecessary divisions and harms the Church. His words resonated as a clear stance against what he defined as a superfluous controversy, a fury that has no pastoral or doctrinal justification. It is within this context that a LifeSite News petition was launched before the Castell Gandolfo Mass, calling for the revocation of Traditionis Custodes and an end to the restrictions imposed on traditional celebrations. To date, it has tens of thousands of signatures and continues to circulate among the faithful as a peaceful but decisive expression of dissent and a demand to be heard. Alongside the petition, many have chosen to write directly to the Pope and the Dicastery for Divine Worship, sending letters, many handwritten, recounting their stories and their bewilderment. They come from families, entire parishes, groups of faithful and individual Catholics who ask not to be treated as a problem to be eliminated, but as a living part of the Church. Amidst prohibitions and decrees, this voice continues to make itself heard. A voice that calls for less fear of tradition and more courage in recognizing that precisely there, where the priest and the faithful look to God together, lies the root of communion and hope. What do you think? If you liked the video, comment, Amen. God bless you.